I'm writing this because I know I'm not mad, but if I don't tell anybody about what happened, I may not be sane for long. I'm just going to start from 2 months ago, when Molly died, and my life changed. Nearly all of us have a friend we can truly rely on, one which knows how you feel and think without ever having to exchange a word. A friend that, no matter how bad things got, would always stand beside you and smile to let you know that you're not alone. My friend was Molly. I knew something was wrong when Molly didn't turn up for our A-level classes and didn't answer any of my texts or calls for 2 days. My dad gave me a lift to her house after school, but when we got there, it was closed off with police tape. The next day, the local paper's front lines read, "Man beats daughter to death with a wrench, then hangs himself." I was distraught. I didn't leave my room for 3 days. My life stopped. I was instantly reduced to a curled-up ball on my bed, sobbing profusely. I knew Molly's dad slapped her around every so often. Whenever I spoke to her about it, she always used to brush it off or ignore it. I never thought that bastard father of hers would ever cave her skull in with his works tools. Molly's mother died when she was very young, so her aunt came to arrange her funeral. She invited everyone in Molly's class to pay their respects. The service was beautiful, or as one could be at a funeral. Though it was a closed coffin funeral, Molly's aunt told everybody she was wearing the dress she would have worn to the prom that year. My heart broke again when I heard this. It was barely a month ago when we had gone and bought matching dresses. Molly was buried beside her mum in the old local cemetery. Her dad was buried in a different one not far away. After the funeral, I began losing interest in my studies, TV, music, and going out in general. I often missed school and had frequent calls about my lack of attendance. Molly was such a major part of my life, and now she's gone, I feel as if there's a void left. A void which can never be filled. After a month of mainly living silently in my room and barely going to school, my mum came to my room and spoke to me. She convinced me that I needed to keep going on with my life and that Molly would have wanted me to do the same. With time I began to study again. I even found the fountain pen Molly had lent me in the last class we had together. It brought a smile to my face to see it again. I felt the need to see my friend once more. I needed to tell her I was doing fine and that I miss her. On the way home from school one day, I bought a small bouquet of flowers and made my way to the cemetery. That's when I felt it. From the moment I walked through the gates of the cemetery, I felt a strange feeling. It was as if the warmth of my body was being drawn out of my skin, ever so slowly. I remember feeling this way slightly on the day of Molly's funeral, but I could have sworn it was the cold weather. As I walked along the gravel path to get to Molly's grave, the feeling intensified. I began to shiver and tremble as the heat was leached from my body. My breath began to mist and my hands went numb. All I wanted to do now was just to lay my flowers on Molly's grave and leave. I looked over the weathered and aged tombstones, but nobody else was around. Yet I felt there was someone watching me, very, very closely. I could only describe it as a type of gaze a wild animal gives to a human. Studious and analysing, searching for weaknesses. After many long seconds had passed, I reached Molly's grave. The flowers fell from my numb hands, and my knees buckled. I fell face down on Molly's grave. All my strength abandoned me, and my vision blurred as I slipped from consciousness. The last thing I remember before blacking out was strange scratch marks on Molly's tombstone and a shadow of a figure standing behind me. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, it was in a dimly lit room, struggling to breathe, feeling colder than I had ever felt in my life. When my eyes adjusted, I let out a choked shriek. A slender creature with tight charcoal black skin straddled my chest with its claw-like hands, coiled around my throat, barely allowing me to breathe. Drool fell from the corners of its enormous mouth, filled with needle-like teeth, as it stared deep into my eye, with its large bloodshot eye in the center of its face. I thrashed, and I kicked, but the creature's grip only tightened. Then it spoke in its hissing and ghastly voice. Centuries I have languished in the shadows of the burial grounds, feeding on scraps of souls left in corpses. But now, your entire soul will restore me. The creature began to squeeze harder on my throat, and I felt the blood in my head build in pressure. I began to feel faint again, as if the life slowly began to slip from me. Thinking quickly, I slid my hand into my pocket and pulled out a pen. I felt its shape in my fingers, and I knew it was the fountain pen that Molly had lent me. As fast as I could, I flicked off the lid with my thumb, and with whatever pitiful amount of strength I had left, I drove its tip into the monster's eye. The pointed nib sank through the gelatinous orb in the creature's head, causing it to throw itself back off me, and spastically thrash around, screeching. The long claw-like nails in the creature's elongated bony fingers sliced across my forearm, leaving 4 stinging gashes. My strength returned, and my lungs filled with air once more. I quickly got to my feet and backed away from the monster, writhing and flailing on the ground. I saw a coffin in the center of the tiny room, and behind it was a door slightly ajar, allowing a small band of light to illuminate the mausoleum. I bolted for it, running around the other side of the coffin, avoiding whatever the fuck that thing was, and shouldered the door open. Without looking back, I ran from the mausoleum and found myself on the far side of the cemetery. I didn't waste any time. I wasn't feeling cold, nor was I feeling weak anymore, but I wasn't going to give that creature another chance to kill me. Clutching my blood-soaked arm, I sprinted for the gates, tears falling from my eyes as I ran. When I arrived home, Mum and Dad took me to a hospital that night to get my arm stitched up. They didn't believe me when I told them about what happened in the cemetery. I convinced my dad to search the mausoleum that I described to him. But when my dad and his friend went, they only found its door to be securely locked. I'm now frequently visiting a psychological therapist, as my parents are under the impression I deliberately harmed myself, so that I could deal with the depression of losing my best friend. At times I think they may be right, and that I did harm myself, and I may have made an elaborate fantasy in my head to escape my depression. But when I wake almost every night, trembling and drenched in cold sweat, to the same nightmare, in which I'm being strangled by that terrifying thing from the cemetery, I think otherwise. I'm not mad. I'm not. But nobody believes a word I say.